Nabila, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
You listened to what Professor Glees had to say, and effectively what he was saying was the time's not right because there isn't enough of a stalemate. The Pakistani Taliban haven't got to the stage where they would admit that they aren't going to win. Therefore, let's not start talking to them until that happens. Would you agree with that?
Well, I can't disagree anymore with what Professor Glees was saying. I think the only way to deal with the extremism, whatever form it takes or whoever perpetrates it, whether the Pakistani Taliban or indeed he mentioned the IRA as well, is through dialogue. And contrary to what he was saying, history has proved that only dialogue works. And it's not through more killing and more destruction that you can achieve.
But it's about timing. But Professor Glees was talking about the nuances of timing, Nabila, which is that it gets to a point where both sides realise that they're not going to win, and most importantly, the terrorists or insurgents themselves realise they're not going to win, so they have to negotiate. And you can't negotiate with the Pakistani Taliban now because they feel that they have the upper hand at the moment.
Well, of course, the timing is of crucial. Is crucial, and of course, it's not a good time for Pakistan now, because of the precisely because of the accusations from the West, in particular, that indeed Pakistan was harbouring Islamic extremists, and most notably Osama bin Laden. But we can't wait until more of that kind of killings happen. There will never be a good time, as it were, and I think I quite disagree. I think it's high time that we convince the Taliban to work within the accepted democratic system within the world community rather than outside of it. And of course now is the time to send a strong message to the Pakistani Taliban, who think they have the upper hand, to say that in fact the methods are wrong, and it's not a good thing, to put it mildly, to make a point in this manner. I think and what the point that Professor Glees was making about answering barbarism with more barbarism is far from impressive. And dare I say, the reason why the Irish peace process was relatively successful is precisely because the provisional IRA represented a single entity with a central commander with which the British government could negotiate with. And I think the main problem that we are facing here is that the Taliban are not a single entity, a single entity that the Pakistani government can approach and deal with. And I think that's the crucial issue there, rather than one of timing.
Okay, Nabila, Javed and Jassel are waiting on the line, but Nabila, I do definitely want to allow you to come back to what Professor Glees was saying.
Yes, I think it's very clear that the Pakistani Taliban are strongly opposed to Pakistan's alliance with the United States in the war on terror and in defeating Islamic terrorism. That's abundantly clear, and that's one of the reasons why the fight against Islamic terrorism in that region of the world in particular is proving extremely difficult. But let's not also forget that Muslims and Muslims in Pakistan in particular have bled the most in terms of Islamic terrorism.
30,000 and counting, yeah.
Absolutely, and I think I go back to my essential point. We have to convince the Pakistani Taliban to work within the democratic framework. There's no other way. We have to convince them that that is the best way out for everybody, to make a political point about the West, if that's what they are about. It's not through killing and more bombing, but through the democratic process.
Okay, Nabila, thank you for that. Okay, well, wait there, Justin, wait there, because Nabila, our guest this afternoon, is a journalist who specialises in Islamic affairs, wants to come in on some of the points that you've made. Nabila?
Yeah, in fact, if I may go back to some of the points that Professor Glees made a bit earlier about the fact that the Pakistani Taliban are not interested in democracy. Well, I think we know that, and the whole point of extremists is that they operate on the margins. and they are on the periphery. And that's why, and I insist on that, we have to bring them back at the center of the democratic process. And it's a truism to say that exclusion breeds radicalization, and that's why I keep going back to my main point, which is a dialogue and bringing extremist elements back into the democratic framework.
But what have you got to offer them? Because if, as Professor Glees pointed out, they are on the up, or they feel that they've got the upper hand, then you don't have much to bargain with them. I mean, negotiation is about you having some cards up your sleeve, is it not? And the Pakistani state doesn't have any cards, does it?
Well, it's in a delicate position at the moment, precisely because of the lack of trust, as it were, between the Pakistani and the government. And so some elements of the Pakistani intelligence services who might have known about the presence of Osama bin Laden on their soil, and hence the lack of trust between not only the Pakistani and the people and the government, but also the very difficult relationship between Pakistan and the US. And there's a need to reestablish that trust, so that the two countries can cooperate more effectively in the fight against terrorism. I would like also to discuss briefly the role of the US in relation to the Pakistani Taliban. I think one of your listeners was quite right to highlight the fact that, who are the Pakistani Taliban? They are essentially militants, mostly ethnic Pashtuns from the semi-autonomous tribal belt along the Afghan border, where Pakistan and the US poured in weapons in the 1980s to support Islamic fighters, including Osama bin Laden, to, of course, fight the Soviet forces in Afghanistan. So there is a legacy there of the US actually fueling Islamist fighters, and it's also the duty of the US to undo that legacy.
Okay, Nabila, thank you very much. Nabila?
I disagree very strongly with that view on things. I think I firmly believe that it's wrong to say that because the Taliban do not believe in democracy, and
can I?
Ash, wait, Nabila.
Kind of suicide bombings or kind of killings, we shouldn't deal with them until they give up doing that. Well, it's obvious that they will not give up doing that, because that's what they believe in, and we have to convince them otherwise. We have to convince them that democracy is the way out if they want to make political points about the anger towards foreign policy or local politics. It's not the way to do it. And I think Pakistan has an immense role to play in that, because it has to create the right environment for democracy to flourish. And it has a lot to do with an unrelenting fight against corruption, setting up more transparency, of course, putting in place more viable political structure. And I think, Ali, one of our previous callers was saying that the tribal nature of Pakistan doesn't allow that. And I think it's wrong also to assume that because Pakistan is, has tribes, that in essence, the tribal system is a hindrance to democracy. Democracy is not a set grid that you can place on any society. It's a flexible one, and it does take into account, it should be able to take into account the flexibilities of any society.